This is All of It. I'm Allison Stewart, live from the WNYC studios in Soho. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. I'm really grateful that you're here. And thanks to everyone who came out to the New York Public Library last night for our Get Lit with All of It book club event. We had a great time with author Tom Perrotta and musical guests, They Might Be Giants. And if you couldn't be there in person, and you might not have been able to because it sold out very quickly, you can always watch the video from the event. Just head to our show page at WNYC.org, and we'll play the radio version on Monday. On today's show, we'll remember the late jazz saxophonist Sonny Rollins. It's been a week since Stephen Colbert signed off from CBS, and we'll talk about the impact of his absence with New York Times television critic James Poniewozik. And we'll debate where to find the best French fries in New York City with the Infatuation's Brian Kim. That's the plan, so let's get this started with why you might want to consider getting a prenup. Prenuptial agreements are having a moment, and not just because of a recent best-selling divorce memoir that laid bare the financial cost of one woman's mistakes. We'll get to that later. But the reality is that the number of Americans who are getting prenups has been on the rise for years, and many of the people who are getting them are not super wealthy. They don't have a lot of assets to protect, but they are looking at future marriages pragmatically. As one person put it in a New Yorker reporter, quote, "Marriage is the ultimate startup. Every startup has a business plan. Why isn't marriage the same way?" So we thought we'd talk about prenups. And here to explain what they do and what you might want to consider, why you might want to consider having one and how to start that conversation is Marcy Katz. She practices family law at the firm Pryor Cashman. Marcy, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, here's a basic.
Yeah.
What is a prenup?
So a prenuptial agreement is an agreement you enter into before you get married, setting forth how you intend to have your financial partnership during the marriage, and in the event it ends, how you see dividing the assets that accumulate.
So what isn't involved in a prenup?
That's a tough question. So, first of all, you can never address anything relating to kids or child support or anything like that. That can only be discussed once they are live, once you get divorced. But it really talks about, I like to break it down into 4 categories. What you want to categorize as separate property, meaning what you keep. What's marital property, which is what you share. And in New York, that's really what you earn from your active efforts during the marriage. How you want to deal with spousal support, also known as alimony or maintenance, in the event of a divorce. And what no one usually thinks about, what happens if one of you dies during the marriage. So those are kind of the 4 buckets that I like to say are addressed in a prenup. We'll
talk about those in just a moment, but we do want to get our listeners involved in this conversation. Hey, do you have a prenup? How did you start the conversation with your partner? What's worked for you? What didn't? Call in and share your experiences with prenups. Our phone number is 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. So who are prenups for?
So, I like to think about now they're really for everyone, because there are 2 things that you kind of can't avoid, whether you have a lot of money or no money at all. And that is, where are you going to be living when you get divorced, and what are the rules in that place? Like, I like to talk about how in New York State, it's very separate property friendly, meaning anything you inherit is separate property, anything you come into the marriage is separate property. But let's say your spouse gets a great job in California. You don't know what the rules are going to be. So why not see a prenup as your way to choose what the rules are for, your financial partnership and if your marriage ends. And also, who knows what the laws, are going to be. There have been massive changes in the spousal support or alimony rules in New York over the past 20 years. Why not decide with your partner what rules you want to apply and make sure that whenever and wherever your marriage ends, those rules are in place?
So if you're someone who can't afford a lawyer for a prenup, do you think everyone should have one?
Listen, it is expensive to hire a lawyer. And in New York, in order for a prenuptial agreement to be enforced, the courts really look at whether both parties had representation and there was full disclosure. So that's certainly an issue. But I think if you don't have much, right, there's not much work that goes into this agreement, and maybe finding an associate or someone younger, or, a law firm, a lot of small firms do this kind of work. Finding someone that fits into your budget, especially if it's not complicated, probably is a reality.
So it doesn't matter necessarily that you have family money.
Well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you have family money, again, in New York, that's separate property.
Gotcha.
But the question is, in some states where there's community property rules, it might be treated different, or it will be treated differently than in New York, where that's separate property. Also, if you're living off of that family money, right, then the other person has a claim to spousal support based on you using that money to support your lifestyle. So do you want that to be the case, or do you want to say, listen, if a divorce happens, we can't think about what we've been using my family money for. It needs to only be based on what each of us have earned and can afford on our own.
So every state has its own laws governing divorce, right?
That's correct.
So what is the point of a prenup within your state? To your point, you might move.
Right, you might move, and there's a choice of law provision in the agreement, so that if you move to California, but you have a New York choice of law provision, the financial provisions, not child support, not child custody, will be governed according to the laws in New York State. So you're really setting the guidelines for any court to consider.
We're talking about prenups with Marcy Katz, an attorney practicing law at Pryor Cashman, where she's a partner. Listeners, get in on the conversation. Do you have a prenup? How did you start that conversation with your partner? What worked for you? What didn't? Call in and share your experiences with us. Our number is 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. Let's say you've decided, yep, we should get a prenup. How do you start that conversation with your partner?
Well, I think it really should start early in the relationship. Once you see this relationship moving forward, I think how you see handling finances during the marriage is a huge part of a relationship. So waiting to the last minute and saying, hey, listen, I don't want to share any of my earnings with you is a value system that you have, and it might not be the same as your partner. So you should really want to figure out if you have the same value system as it relates to earnings, money, both parties continuing to work, one person staying home to take care of the kids, as soon as you decide that this is someone you might want to have a serious relationship with.
So do you think you should wait until you're engaged to have this conversation?
Absolutely not. I don't think you should get engaged unless you've had this conversation.
Yeah.
I think people find themselves in very difficult situations where, they get proposed to, and now, I like to say now with social media, people are posting pictures of their engagement. They have a photographer standing next to them, ready to go, and they're posting for the world to see that they're getting married. And then their partner says, oh, by the way, I want you to sign a prenup that nothing I earn is yours. Well, now this person has to decide, is it more embarrassing to say, I'm calling off the wedding? Or, are they just going to sign whatever this person wants? I think it takes away a lot of leverage. I hate that word in this conversation, but, I think it's really important to discuss it, to know that you're on the same page about financial matters before you decide to get married.
We got a text from a listener who asks the question, what about prior debt?
So prior debt is your own separate property in the state of New York. Again, I only practice in New York, so I don't know the rules everywhere. But I think there's a conversation to be had about, how is this debt going to be paid off? What money are you going to use? If you're the spouse who doesn't have the debt, are you okay using marital earnings to pay off the debt, right? Because then all of a sudden, instead of accumulating assets, you're paying off someone else's debt. So I think having that conversation about what money will be used to pay it off is very important.
Let's take a couple calls.
Sure.
Tim is calling from Wall Township. Hi, Tim. Thanks for taking the time to call. All of it. You're on the air.
Hi, yes. Thank you so much for taking my call. So my wife and I did have a prenup. Her parents really wanted it, but we went into it very amicably because we looked at it as, we know that everybody changes through time. So instead of trying to look out for ourselves, it was really the foundation of our marriage, looking out for each other. That way, in case I became a jerk in the future, for instance, she's protected against that, and same. So it was actually a really kind of romantic start to our partnership because we were looking out for each other's futures, even from who we could one day be.
Tim.
And honestly, it was a really pleasant experience.
Oh, thank you for calling in. That was a wonderful way to put it. Let me ask you, when you're putting together your prenup, who should be in the room? Should it be you and your lawyers? Because he mentioned the parents wanted a prenup.
That happens a lot. So, each party should have their own counsel. So, if you choose that you want your parents in the room with your counsel, that's one thing, but, it's never going to be, or it never should be, as far as I'm concerned, you having your parents and the other party in the room. I like to tell people, there's oftentimes you could play kind of a good cop, bad cop, and that they should always use me as the bad cop because I want to preserve their relationship and make sure we don't get in the way of them deciding they want to get married. And oftentimes that involves me having to deal with, how these parents feel and expressing, concerns to the other lawyer that my client might not want to express.
Let's talk to Helene, who's calling in from Brooklyn. Hi, Helene. Thank you so much for calling all of it. You're on the air.
Hi. I just wanted to give my perspective of having been a divorce attorney for 25 years. And I think that the illusion that people have when they're doing prenups really gets changed at the end of the marriage. People talk very optimistically about we're doing an equal business deal. And I rarely find that that's true. Usually it's from the perspective of someone who already has money, even though what they have before is protected. If it grows by active efforts, that's in the pot. And also the person who has the greater perspective of earning a lot of money. And the other person, usually the woman, still, even in this day of age, acknowledges that, thinking that the marriage is not going to end. And then at the end, instead of it being an amicable divorce, it's a very angry divorce because one person wants the prenup enforced and the other person thinks that now it's inequitable. So I don't know if that has changed so much. The other thing about parents, when parents are pushing for a prenup, one of my feelings is you're really not creating your own partnership. You're still a part of that nuclear family that you belong to. And you are exercising their interests, and your interests are so tied to them. One of the things I always felt when I see young people, first marriages, applying this, how much do they really want to get connected as the new unit as opposed to remaining attached to the units they came from?
Thank you so much for calling in, Helene. Is there anything you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, listen, I think you just have to be realistic about what the issues are, right? If one party is getting significant funds from their family and the family requires this prenup, so in the event the marriage ends, the money goes to whether it's siblings or grandchildren instead of the spouse. I think that that's a reasonable request. And whether it's reasonable or not, I think, again, this is about financial conversations and whether these two people are on the same page. And if the other party's okay with it, again, having that conversation, to me, is always the most important part.
We are talking about prenups with Marcy Katz, an attorney practicing family law at Pryor Cashman, where she is a partner. Listeners, we'd like to get you in on this conversation. Do you have a prenup? How did you start the conversation with your partner? What worked for you? What didn't? You can call in and share your experience with us. Our phone number is 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. How long does it take to create a prenup?
Sometimes people call me in the weddings in 6 weeks, and I do my best to get it done if the parties seem to be on the same page. I think that's the question. If you have the conversation before you come to me, it's going to go a lot faster than if you call me and then you have to break the news to your fiance. So, sometimes people come to me a year before and say, we don't want to think about this at all as we're really enjoying the engagement process, so we'd like to do it now. but sometimes it happens at the end. You don't want to do it too close, especially if it's a very uneven division of assets. But I think 3 to 6 months you can get it done.
We'll be talking more about prenups with Marcy Katz after a quick break. This is all of it. You're listening to All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. My guest in studio is Marcy Katz, an attorney practicing family law at Pryor Cashman, where she's a partner. And we are talking about prenups. Do you have a prenup? How'd you start the conversation with your partner? Our phone number is 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. Let's talk to John, who's calling from Bath Beach in Brooklyn. Hey, John, thanks for calling All of It.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to say that I was married and I didn't have a prenup because I just trusted my now ex-wife. And, I believe in that expression, lightning doesn't strike twice. So my daughter was in the car before when your segment started. And I told her, I said, if I ever get married again, it's going to have a prenup because I'm never going to find anyone like your mother, because my ex-wife just wasn't financially driven. Like, she wasn't motivated to, for lack of a better term, clean me out. But I know it's not going to happen again, So I would get one now. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks for calling in. Let's talk to Jan, who's calling from upstate New York. Hi, Jan. Thanks for calling All of It.
Hi there. Oh, I love this conversation, and I'm going to speak to my ladies for a minute because it in my experience has affected us the most. I did not have a prenup. You know that Gwen Guthrie song, "Ain't Nothing Going On at the Ritz, No Romance Without Finance." If you cannot have a conversation with your partner about your finances previous to getting married, you need to understand that you've got to stop doing permanent things with temporary people. And in my situation, New York State, after 15 years of bankrolling a spouse to support his career because I believed in it, we then got to the state where we were separating and divorcing. And New York State at the time is a state where precedent is set by your separation agreement. What you will agree to in your separation is what your final divorce details will be. You've got to back it all the way up. Put in the time, have the conversation, marry a partner and a spouse that wants to have these conversations, and parents have no business being in the middle of their children's finances.
Thank you for calling in, Jan. Belle Burden's memoir, Strangers, is about the end of her marriage, and it sparked a whole bunch of Reddit threads devoted to it. She writes about her divorce from her husband and how having a prenup didn't protect her financially, and her decision about her prenup, what it would be. Have you noticed women talking to you about this book, or have you heard about it?
Definitely. In that book, and I read it a while ago, but I think the issue was, right, she agreed to the terms that the husband wanted with the lawyer on the phone, listening to both of them, and asked the terms that were not in her best interest. And again, this is where I say, use your lawyer to be bad cop and say, no, this isn't happening. No, I'm not having a call with the two of you. Ask your lawyer to really stick up for you so that you don't have to have these conversations. Or, as the last caller said, this is not the right partner for you, right? Take that as a sign.
How does the process work? Do you and your partner, can you go to the same lawyer, or is that considered counseling?
You have to have your own lawyers. But, if someone calls to me, right, the ideal client calls me and says, my fiance and I have worked out that we agree to the terms. Can you write this up? Then what I usually say is, does your fiance have a lawyer? If not, I can give you some names of people who I really trust and respect in my field. They're not going to do what I ask them to do, but they're people who I know are not going to make this a bigger mess than it needs to be. And this way we can kind of all work amicably together to make sure that the client's intentions are put into the agreement.
I had a question around existing IP. If you go into, before you get married and you have an idea for something, or you create an app that in 10 years is worth $1 billion, how do you address potential wealth?
Yeah, so I think you can certainly, take that and say that this IP is created and any monies that come from it down the road are separate. New York would say, well, if you're working on this app during the marriage, right, the active efforts contributed are marital. But if you and your partner agree that you don't want this to be marital, again, that you want to move it from the marital property bucket to the separate property bucket, that's an excellent reason to have a prenup and say, I created it before the marriage. Anything that comes from it, I want it to be mine. And if you're on the same page, again, a prenup, you can do whatever you and your partner want, and that would be a great reason to do it.
Let's talk to Natalie, who's calling us from downtown Brooklyn. Hey, Natalie, thanks for taking the time to call. All of it, you're on the air.
Hi. So my perspective is coming from my view as a millennial woman, and I'm a woman of color. I'm the first person in my family to make a really decent salary, and in general, I have made more money than anyone that I've ever dated, and I've been on the dating scene for the last year, or I have been in the last year. And so the way that I approached it is I just let people know that this was a personal value of mine. So if we dated, I would be having a prenup, and it made it easier to discuss with people because it wasn't decided on a relationship by relationship basis. And the way that people responded to that was also very valuable to me in terms of deciding who I wanted to date.
Thank you.
And another thing that I did in respective to dating is basically a friend gave me some advice that was, you essentially already have a prenup. It's whatever your state is deciding. And so you either decide that you want the state to decide for you or make a decision for yourself. And that's something that I value doing, is making decisions about my own life. And so I did that. And it's also better to do it while you're happy with each other rather than what could potentially be a sour situation in the future.
Natalie, thank you for your perspective. It's interesting. There's a lot of media outlets are quoting this statistic about 1 in 5 adults who are either married or engaged had a prenuptial agreement. This is according to a Harris poll. The share was higher among younger adults who were engaged or had been married. 41% of Gen Z respondents said they had signed one, as did 47% of millennials. What do you think is behind that increase?
So I think, we have to think about how traditional marriages don't exist as much anymore, right? It used to be that husband went to work every day and, wife stayed home with the kids. But now that women are in the workforce, women, as that last caller, are earning more than men in a lot of fields, or, that women can say, this is how I want to have a financial partnership, which they couldn't necessarily do before. So I think women are really, kind of empowered to have this conversation now that they can say, I can take care of myself, and this is how I see things going forward.
Let's talk to Vernita from Jersey City. Hey, Vernita, thanks for calling All of It. What was your experience with a prenup?
My experience was, good morning, everybody. My experience was positive. I recognized that there was an age difference between my husband and I. He was, his career was further along than mine at the time, and he was also, I was going to be his second wife. So I recognized that he wanted to protect what he had earned prior to me, and wanted to have, complete faith that I wasn't just marrying him for, financial circumstances. And so we had a time horizon on ours of just 5 years. I'm happy to say we came up with our own plan. And like I said, it had the 5-year time horizon, and we've been married 22 years now. So it turned out to be a very positive experience for us.
What did you mean when you said the 5-year time horizon exactly?
Well, I mean, it was only for the benefit of, he didn't want to get married, and then soon thereafter, we get divorced, and then all our finances are tied up, and we got married in California. So, it was just something that we thought about, and I respected his decision to request it. And I was also, I'm a child of a May-December marriage, and I just recognized, the implications on his child and in the future, and just wanting to make sure people weren't worried, about how things were going to play out in the event that if we did get divorced, or if, something more tragic happened, within that 5-year time frame. But like I said, we've been married 22 years now, and very happy.
Thank you so much for calling in. We have a question, Marcy. This says, does a prenup later have any precedence over a subsequent will? Is there anything to consider when making a will if you have a prenup?
So as I said, the fourth part of the prenup, I like to say we get to talk about, or the parties get to decide what they want to happen if one party dies while they're still married. And, you know, in New York State, if your partner dies and you don't have, and you have a will, and you don't leave a third of your estate to your spouse can elect their right of election and say, I want my third. So in a prenup, you can talk about whether in New York, again, you can waive that right to the right of election. So your will can always leave someone more. But people will say, well, what if we're still happily married? And my joke, I like to say, well, you could still be married and not happily. Like, you don't know where you are in that phase. So, you know, you should definitely address, you know, and I think it could change depending on whether you have kids, whether you have a child from a prior marriage. It's really important to address what happens if you die. So I think that that's just as important as what happens if if you get divorced.
Can you tweak a prenup?
Yeah, so you can enter into a postnuptial agreement that you can make any changes you want. It just has to be in the same, you know, form and manner and executed the same way as the prenup. But certainly you can make changes.
Let's talk to Fiona from Huntington, Long Island. Hi, Fiona. Thanks for calling All of It.
Thank you very much. This is a great discussion. My son was married in California, had a prenup prior to marriage. He and his partner lived together for 6 or 7 years and now getting a divorce. Does the prenup just apply to the period of marriage, or is there some call on the monies sort of earned jointly or bank accounts prior to the marriage?
So I don't know how it works in California. Here, the prenup really just addresses the marriage. I mean, in the prenup, any bank accounts that you had together before the marriage, I'm sure you're going to list them in order to have an enforceable agreement, you have to list all your assets and liabilities that exist as of the date of the marriage. So if you have a joint account, right, as of the date of the marriage, you're going to decide in the prenup what to do with that. But the prenup itself really just talks about, I guess it talks about everything that exists from before and after, whether it's joint or separate.
There was an article in the New Yorker a few months ago titled Why Millennials Love Prenups. And the author wrote that over the course of reporting the article, she came to see the value of considering a prenup. This is a quote from the article. The conversation alone is kind of a personality test. Are you about to marry a person who wants to be reimbursed for the wallpaper you put up in the nursery, who doesn't want to help you pay off your student loans, who wants to give the ring back? Or does this person look at you and think, I want to give this woman everything? What's your take on this?
I think that's pretty extreme. I think that there's certainly a fairness to if someone comes into the marriage with a lot more money and uses it to support the lifestyle and wants credits for, wallpaper is one thing, but renovation to your marital home. I don't think that that's necessarily a negative or should be seen to be that extreme. I think if it does get that extreme and you're marrying someone like that, the question is, maybe we're getting married, but we're not having a financial partnership. And are you okay with that dynamic, right? If you have totally different values regarding your finances. And if you are, no judgment, right? No judgment on what you want to do. As long as you and your partner are on the same page, I am fine with it. I think when you're not on the same page and you're trying to convince yourself to do something that you otherwise don't want to do, that's where the issues are.
What is the biggest misconceptions that people come to you with when they come to you and say, I want a prenup? What do you have to sort of straighten them out about?
Well, I think the misconception is that you only get a prenup if you don't trust the other person. And I think that really, as one of the callers said, it's not about that. It's, I have a friend who's a therapist, and I said to her a long time ago, and she still remembers, this person's never going to love you or want to give you more than they want to give you right now, right? Mm-hmm. You're in the middle of engagement bliss, and this is the best you're going to get. So I think it's about thinking about it that way, as opposed to like wanting to destroy the other person. Like, what makes sense for us? This could be a positive thing. You're having the conversation. You don't have to litigate down the road. So it doesn't mean that this person's a bad person if they want to get one of these agreements. And I have to say, I think younger people are seeing that, right? The older generations are like, a prenup? Like, it's so tacky, and what are you doing? But younger people are like, wait a second. Let's make the decisions about how we handle our financial partnership for during the marriage. Like, if you know that you don't have a financial partnership, don't leave your job, right? Don't leave your job to take care of kids. But at least up front that's how you have to be thinking. And I actually think that's such a positive as opposed to like the negative spin that these agreements used to get.
Marcy Katz is an attorney practicing family law at Pryor Cashman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun.